Welcome to the Hunter's Campfire. G'day, my name is Mark van den Bogart, hunter, fisherman, writer and storyteller. With me is Ian Hurley, technologist, hunter, hunting mentor and proud father. Together we want to help you get hunting. Our focus is helping you make the most of public land hunting right here in Australia, even if you don't live in a state where it's offered. This podcast series is all about helping you get started, helping you build your knowledge and your confidence so you can get out there and live your own hunting adventures. Now, let's get started. Well, good evening everyone, and thanks for watching. Tonight we have with us Jonathan Steele, or as we like to call him, Jono, who's going to talk to us about all things hunting, including some of his experiences overseas, but most importantly, about his experiences as a new hunter hunting the Pilliga. So welcome, Jono.
Good evening.
So, mate, let's jump straight into it. Give us a bit of a background of your hunting experience.
Yeah, well, as you can probably tell from the accent, I'm not a native Queenslander or native Australian. Born in South Africa. Like many who've been on this podcast, I wasn't born into a hunting family. I was raised in a single parent family. My mum raised me. My parents were divorced. My dad was around, but not very involved in my life, and he wasn't a hunter. He got me involved in fishing though, which I'm, very grateful for. So I was brought up as a fisherman. I lived a few minutes from the beach, so I had access to, really good fishing, really good diving. And that probably got me started in, that sort of pursuit sports. It was really when I got to my mid-teens in high school. I went to an all-boys high school, and I had a economics teacher who would rock up on a Friday morning and proclaim that he had a hangover, didn't want to teach us, and as long as we didn't make a noise, he was happy for us to do whatever we wanted. So we'd sit there in class and just talk amongst ourselves. We're not going to actually do schoolwork if we don't have to. And that's where I got to know my mate Rory. So Rory's my best mate. We've been friends since mid-teens. We had a shared interest in fishing, but those discussions soon changed into hunting. His grandfather was an old school farmer, grew up in the Natal Midlands of South Africa, and it introduced Rory to hunting as a youngster. And we started talking about it, and my ears sort of pricked up, and never really been interested in hunting, but the conversations really drew me in. He'd bring some photos in and show me some of the animals that he had shot, and it just really got me interested in hunting. So year 12, we finished school, and within I think 3 days of finishing year 12, we're in my little ute heading a few hours south to a property to go hunting. It was my first hunting trip. We'd borrowed a 270, a Bruno 270, beautiful little gun from my doctor, who was actually an avid hunter, and he was really trying to drive us towards hunting. It was actually his property. It was just a cattle farm that had some game on it, and he said, "Here you go. This is the way you go there, and go for it." I'd never shot a rifle before, so I was really following Rory's lead and seeing what this hunting thing was about. We got there on the first day, and we headed out into this gully, and there was a herd of probably 20 or 30 blessbuck. And Rory shot one, and that was the first animal I'd ever seen shot. It's the first time I ever heard a rifle go off, and I was just absolutely hooked. We spent the rest of that afternoon and evening sitting around the fire, having a beer, gutting this thing, preparing it, getting the food going, getting the meats all chopped up and sliced up for making biltong, which is something that all South Africans are raised on. When you're an infant teething, you get a stick of biltong and you just chew it until it's this white leathery stuff. So it's something we're raised on, and now to be actually harvesting it and actually being able to make it for ourselves, I was absolutely hooked, and that was me. I was 18. I applied for my first gun license for a 308, which I still own to this day. Unfortunately, it's over in South Africa. Trying to get it over into Australia is difficult, but I've still managed to maintain my license, and it's got some sentimental value to me. And someday I'd like to try and bring it over if I can. But I've actually signed it over to Rory. He keeps it in his gun safe for me. And when I go back to South Africa, I've got my old rifle, my first ever rifle that I've owned that I can shoot with. So it's really got that sentimental value to me. But from there, we started, heading to the range once I got that rifle and got my license, doing some practice, learning how to shoot, and doing a couple of hunting trips. Slowly, just shooting the smaller game, the cheaper animals, because I was a young student, and couldn't afford much, but a couple of $100 for an animal, and you got the whole carcass, and you could drop it off at the butcher, and the butchers will process it for you, turn it into biltong, or you could do it yourself if you've got the means to, which at that time I didn't. And then, did a couple of hunts, and I was absolutely hooked on hunting. My whole life revolved around hunting at that point. When I turned 21, decided to move to the UK. I didn't get involved in shooting. I lived in London. I was 21 years old. I was partying. I had access to, all the spoils of London. But every year I'd go back to South Africa for a trip, and my whole trip was planned around hunting. I'd meet up with Rory. We'd talk about hunting. We would plan our trip. We would go off for a week. It would target a specific species, or a specific animal. Make sure that we were, getting what we wanted. But at the end of the day, I'd still turn that carcass into biltong, go and distribute it amongst all my friends, eat whatever I could for that week, and then just distribute it amongst everyone. South Africans are very resourceful when it comes to meat. They go out every winter. That's their hunting season. They'll fill the freezer, make their biltong, make their sausage, which they have a sausage which is a big coil, which they call boerewors, which translates to farmer's sausage. Chuck that in the freezer. That gets cooked on on a charcoal fire. So very resourceful, and that's where my respect for venison and for utilizing the whole animal has come from. And to this day, I still make sure that I utilize as much as possible, and wherever possible, of the animals that I take. But anyway, every year I'd go back to South Africa. We'd always do these trips. We'd always try and target new species, new areas. Try and make it a new experience every single trip, to get the most out of it. It was only after a few years in the UK that I started exploring the hunting opportunities that the UK has to offer. I found someone online, got in touch with him, and he was offering some sort of guided hunts for people of all sorts of experiences. So I met up with him. He was a young guy named Austin. We're still friends to this day. He's an awesome guy. But I'd never hunted in the UK. I didn't really understand the species and the etiquette and everything else, but he really showed me the ways, and took me out and showed me foxes and how we can shoot them. And we went and did some fallow deer shooting, and it was completely different shooting that I'd ever done before, because the majority of the shooting was done in high seats, at last light or first light. Very little stalking. We did the occasional stalking, but most of it was sitting in a high seat, which was very different to the hunting in Africa, where it's usually walk and stalk. You head out for the day and go walking, and kind of like the hunting that we have here. So it was a very different experience, but I embraced it. It was the way that it was done there, and I've always fully immersed myself in the way that it's done. They have some qualifications that they offer called the deer stalking certificate. So over there, hunting is called stalking as opposed to hunting. Hunting is generally done on a horse chasing foxes, which is of course illegal now. But so they call it stalking. So I completed my deer stalking certificate, level 1, which is a combination of theory and practical work, where you have to understand the game laws, the firearm laws, the species identification, looking for diseases within animals, and then doing species identification in the field. So they show you a video, and you have to be able to identify if it's a male or female, because they've got close seasons, obviously, for game. And some of the species can be quite similar. And then a practical test, a shooting test, as well. And then once you complete all that, you're a qualified deer stalker. And they have different levels. So when you get to level 2, you actually have a mentor, a person who actually goes out with you to make sure that you're following safe practices when you're stalking, etc.
How long did that take, that process from starting your theory and practical to being allowed to hunt by yourself?
So there's no restriction. You don't have to have a qualification. It's not like mainland Europe where you have to have a qualification. It's some places or some farms that you shoot will dictate that you need to be qualified to shoot on your own, but it's not a legal requirement. It's really just a voluntary process to go through to improve your knowledge and your skills. And if you wanted to go on some guided hunts and some properties, they'll dictate that you have to have a minimum of level 1. The other thing as well is So in the UK, the deer belongs to the landowner. Obviously, going back all those years, that's the way it is. So a lot of the bigger states, they own the deer. So you can come and shoot one, but at the end of the day, it's the property of the estate or the station, with, you know, in Australian terms.
And
so
that ownership transfers from farmer to farmer if they hop the fence. Is that how it works?
correct, yeah.
Same as the
So
roaming elephants in Africa. They cross from
yeah. So
one
if they're on
location. Its possession is the law rather than putting a tag on it. Yeah.
Absolutely. So that's how some of those big estates make their money, is by selling game, whether it be, you know, the deer or pheasants or partridge or whichever. So that most of those bigger properties will have, you know, a big larder or cold room, a processing facility, and then they actually sell that game to a game dealer, and that gets processed and put into the food chain. But in order for a hunter to be able to do that yourself, you have to have that, at least that deer stalking certificate level 1.
What a novel idea, Mark. Game as a resource. Crazy.
I've got some experience hunting in the UK as well, and that's so often you'll pay for access, and the way that they tend to deer hunt over there is kind of, as Jono said, it's kind of like there's 2 shifts a day. There's a morning and an afternoon shift, so you don't book a day, you kind of book 2 shifts. So they'll go out, and it might be, you know, 100 pounds or 70 pounds for morning, and then such and such, because you're not walking on time. Basically, you're going to an ambush position. And then if you're successful, you can, in certain instances, but not all instances, then pay extra money to buy the meat. So you can kind of buy the meat off or it might be it's already basically you know, accounted for. It just goes into the processing. So it's a commercial activity, if you know what I mean. It becomes a commercial activity. So you get the privilege to shoot it, and then the gamekeeper takes it and off it goes, and you might not see it again. I've done both. I've hunted on both situations where, you know, I shot it, but it belonged to the property, and so we didn't see it. There was another one I was on. They actually said, look, if you want to buy it. So I bought some for the family and took it home, and we had Christmas venison. So, but certainly it's an approach that puts a monetary value on the animal right through the food chain. If you know, as Jono said, you know, it's not just the hunting, it's hunting, and then there's the meat outcome.
Interesting. Sorry,
absolutely. It's a resource, you know, at the end of the day. And as you were saying, you can pay for it. Generally, the going rate was £1 a pound. Is the going rate for that. So you shot a roe deer or a fallow deer or even smaller little muntjacs. You know, if you want to keep it, you pay what the estate would have got for that from the game dealer, which would have been £1 a pound, and you take it home. And that's what I used to do. You know, I try and utilize the meat wherever possible, but they've got a different outlook on it. So game has a value, and it's a value to the landowner. So as Mark says, it's got a monetary value. So therefore they really embrace it and they protect it. But it, you know, in order for that to go into the food chain, you need to be qualified, because they want to make sure that meat has some integrity and traceability. So the carcasses get tagged, you know, when the carcass was shot, where it was shot, by who processed it, etc. So it provides that traceability, really, of that carcass, and that just goes back to it being a valuable resource.
And with that, like, what you might experience is there's actually like you're not supposed to touch the animal in a lot of ways. You know, that they depending on who you are and what the relationship is, that might be okay, but the general rule is you don't touch it. Once it's on the ground, it's now a potential item for sale. So, you know, you as the amateur kind of stand back and say, this is something I learned firsthand. You know, had no experience in that kind of thing, so I kind of stepped forward and you know, it was just, oh, hang on, you know, you shouldn't be doing that. What's going on? No, you need to stand back, and like my mate Steve went, just ease off there, buddy. Let them do their job, type thing. So you've got to there's a different approach. And same with pheasants. I've had the opportunity to shoot pheasants on a true drive, and those birds, when they hit the ground, you know, that's a saleable item. So it gets picked up by someone who's employed to pick it up. It gets put with the other ones and it goes off. And what they'll often do, as a courtesy, they'll say, would you like a brace? And they might give you 2 birds a brace if you want them. But there's the shooting and then there's the meat, and they're 2 very separate components to the whole operation.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, I've experienced the bird shooting side of it as well. So that was, you know, part of me embracing, you know, all of these shooting opportunities as I started doing. I did some rough shooting, which Mark, I know you did as well, walking around with a shotgun in the field, and you know, you've usually got a dog running in and out of the hedgerow, kicking up some pheasants, or kicking up a pigeon, or maybe kicking out a hare or a rabbit. Did that with a shotgun. Got some good feed out of that as well. Rabbit stew, amazing. You know, really good meat. Really good fun. Really embracing, you know, all the hunting opportunities or shooting opportunities that were on offer. And look, it's a great shooting experience. It's very different to one that I grew up doing. From, you know, sitting around, you know, in South Africa, it's quite social. You always have the campfire. When you get back from your hunt, you walk in stalking. In the UK, it's very much, as Mark said, it's a morning and an evening. You get taken to your high seat, you get put in your high seat, and if the deer are coming, you know, onto the paddock to feed, you're ambushing them and shooting them. And the opposite in the morning, when they're coming off the paddock into some cover, you're shooting them there. And that's probably the one aspect of the UK shooting that I didn't enjoy as much, was the fact that you were generally on your own, or maybe you were with one person sitting in a high seat. After that, you would either go home, or, you know, you'd go back to someone's house and within a few minutes and sit around and have some dinner. And there was no, you know, campfire going or anything like that. Obviously, the weather plays a part in that. It's usually pretty bitterly cold outside in the wintertime when you're doing most of the culling activities. But it wasn't the shooting that I really enjoyed. I enjoy the real social aspect of it, sitting around the fire, you know, having a few beers after a day, telling stories. That's really the enjoyable part. But I embraced it, did it. It's what I had available to me, and I try and, you know, make the most of it. So I sort of wanted to target all the species that I could. So there's 6 species of deer in the UK available to hunt. I managed to get 5 of them. The one I didn't get was a red deer. And, you know, I've shot the muntjac, the small little muntjac, even the Chinese water deer, which I think the UK is the only place in the world where you can commercially hunt them. And I managed to get a nice little buck. You can probably see it just behind me over there. You can see its skull. It looks like a saber-toothed deer. But for me, that was, as I said, I like to embrace what's available to me, and I'm not a trophy hunter. I never say that. You know, I eat pretty much every animal that I shoot where possible. But I like to have a challenge as well, and, you know, shooting all 6 species of deer was a goal of mine. I didn't get that 6th one, but I knew that I was moving to Australia, and I knew red deer was available to me here in Queensland, so I didn't make it I didn't have to get it before I left. I did try it. Went to Scotland, tried to get a red deer. Didn't see one, unfortunately. My mate shot one, but I didn't. But I certainly tried. But yeah, on that, going back to that deer stalking certificate, actually on that course was a young Australian guy by the name of Louis. He was in a similar situation to me, quite young, living in the UK, sort of trying to get involved in the shooting opportunities that were there, and we hit it off. We became mates, and, you know, kept in contact, and, you know, we did a weekend hunt together, and through our conversations and talking, to know that, you know, he had hunted quite a bit here in Australia where he grew up. He grew up in Sydney. His family had a property out in Mudgee in New South Wales, and he said, well, look, if you're ever in Australia, let me know. We can go out there and do some hunting. And I said, well, that's a bit strange. You know, we're actually thinking of moving out to Australia, and I was planning to do a bit of a recce trip. And he goes, oh, that's awesome. Let's you know, combine this trip and we'll do it together. So I flew out to Australia, never been here before, and landed in Sydney. And he comes from, you know, quite a well-off family and all that. So I got this introduction to Sydney, of sailing down Sydney Harbour on someone's yacht, and it was a very different experience. But yeah, look, I enjoyed it. It was brilliant. But, you know, he took me out to their family property at Young, and then from there we drove up to Mudgee, which is this little hut in the middle of nowhere. It's not huge. It's just 500 hectares, but they had this hut that they'd built up over 10 or 15 years, and they had taken all their family school holidays up to that area. And it was down by the creek, and you could grab a rifle, and we'd head up into the hills and go hunting goats. I'd never seen a wild goat before, feral goat. But in that week, we managed to get, I think, 16 goats between us, and that was my first introduction to A, us hunting in Australia, and B, to goat hunting. And just sitting there next to this creek, having this huge expanse of open areas available to you that you could just explore, and it was peaceful. Whereas the shooting back in the UK, was generally just a high seat on an evening or morning. Quite often you'd have a walker walking behind you on the track, or a horse rider coming up on the bridleway. It didn't have that expanse to it, that wide open spaces that I'd grown up with. And I had a amazing time there at Mudgee on that trip. Went back to the UK, and I had an amazing trip to Australia, and went back to the UK, and that was it. I was newly married at that time, and we decided that at that point we were going to move to Australia. It took us a few years, but we eventually got here. But before moving to Australia, I joined the ADA straight after my trip to Australia. So my mate Louis was a member of the ADA. So I've been a member of the ADA since, I think, 2007. Didn't move to Australia until 2014. So, but they used to post me the newsletter back when it was just a little printed booklet. I used to get the monthly newsletter, or quarterly newsletter, I think, at that time. And I really got to read about the stories and the experiences of hunting sambar and red deer and goats and pigs and all that. And it really just got me really excited about moving out here. And once we got our visa, and we were in the process of moving, of preparing to move out here, I started posting on some of the Facebook groups about what gear do I need, what are the recommended optics from a gear point of view and all that. And it was actually Mark here who responded, and actually answered a few of my questions, added me as a friend on Facebook, and sent me a few private messages about this is the type of hunting, this is the type of gear that you need. European hunting is very different to Australian hunting. We had very large, objective lens scopes for that last light hunting, because that's what we were doing. You needed as much light gathering as you could. I had a good Swarovski, which I know Mark's come around to, but I had a really good Swarovski scope. But it wasn't suited to Australian conditions. And Mark was the one who really, gave me that advice about what gear to use. And that's why I highly recommend anyone getting into hunting to watch the gear videos that you guys have put up. I think those are really good videos on the podcast. I think they really give a good insight into the gear that's required for especially state forest hunting. Because for me, I had no experience of hunting public land. I'd never done that before. I'd only ever hunted high seats, and Africa's slightly different. Generally you have a 3-9x40, and that'll cover you for anything. But I think that that's a pretty good scope choice for state forest hunting. But in the UK, you wouldn't have a 3-9x40, because the 40mm lens is not going to be enough for that light gathering for that last light hunting. You need nice big 56mm, where that's what I had, was the Swarovski 8x56 fixed power, just for that really good light gathering. But I don't think that would work in the Pilliga. So it was Mark's advice, really, that
you'd get that shimmer, wouldn't you? That's sort of...
You'd get blind. Your eyes would burn out of your head.
Look, I was going to bring that scope with me, and I decided to sell it. I'm kicking myself a little bit now, because they cost an absolute fortune, but it would never have worked. It just wasn't the right type of scope.
You would have got it on top of something on your trip to the Southern Alps at some point. Would have been good from ridge to ridge shooting, I reckon.
Well, I did buy a Swarovski, but it is only a, what's the name, 1 to 20. It's a 24mm front objective. I went the smallest one they had. So yeah, but that's very true. The English, I was a bit, as I said, big objective lenses. They don't like 30 cals over there. They're they lots of much more what you might associate with a rifle that you're going to shoot from a seated, supported position. So they don't generally hunt with what we would call just a normal hunting rifle, a carry-on rifle, because you're not doing that. There is some stalking, but the vast majority of it is shooting. And even when they stalk, I think they legally have to shoot off sticks or something like that, or there is some consideration about using sticks as well. So even if you are stalking, as they call it, you'll be shooting off sticks.
Yeah, I don't believe there's a legal requirement, but it's certainly recommended.
Yeah.
I had a 30 cal, I had a 308 with the suppressor on. Makes a big difference. A lot of the estates these days demand that you have a suppressor just so you don't annoy the neighbors. And they work well, not just from a annoying the neighbors perspective, but saving your ears. It makes a huge difference. If you fire a 30 cal without a suppressor, which most of us probably do these days, but one with the suppressor, it makes a big difference. And the argument that they had there was really around from a health and safety perspective. So health and safety is a huge issue in the UK, and they argued the point that, well, how many people are going deaf? What is the impact to the public health system for all these people getting hearing aids and losing their hearing through shooting? If we just put suppressors on them, then we're probably going to reduce that. So that became the norm. It still had to be on your firearms license but it was very rare to see a rifle without a suppressor. Pretty much everyone has one. And I got used to shooting one, and yeah, it adds to the weight, but then you're not carrying it around most of the time. You walk into a high seat and climbing into it, and quite often you could, that'd be 100 yards, 200 yards, and you climb into the high seat. So to have a heavy rifle with the big suppressor on the end of it is not really an issue. But anyway, moved to Australia. We arrived here in 2014. Tried to apply for my firearms license straight away, but didn't happen because my landlord refused to accept the installation of a safe. So I had to wait until we purchased our first property. But as soon as that happened, applied for my firearms license, did my safety course through the ADA out there at Belmont. And I could use my RPL, my recognition of prior learning, from my previous certificates, etc., that I could get through. I had to do obviously the legal aspects of it, but I could get through the theory pieces and the practical shooting pieces. I didn't have to do those because I had that recognition from my previous learning, and applied for my first rifle, which Mark put me on to Scott at Queensland Gun Exchange to get me my first rifle. Did me a good deal, and I've still got that rifle. It's still my favorite rifle at the moment. Obviously added to it, but that's a 30 cal. It's a nice Tika 308. I think it's perfect for the shooting that we do here in Southeast Queensland. I've shot red deer with it, pigs with it, goats with it. It's more than sufficient it covers everything basically. But once I arrived, obviously I've been a member of the ADA for a number of years, but went to a few branch meetings, met a few people, joined one of the trips down to Nundle. Met yourself, Ian, down there.
Was that your first trip?
That was my first trip. That first one when I came down with Pierre.
And you've never come back. We must have scared you off.
No, I've been twice, both times. You've been there. We've seen you there. I haven't been since. But yeah, that was the first one we did was when I met yourself. That wasn't the one when you shot that buck that you talked about in that episode. It was the following year, I think, that you got that one. Yep. Yeah. With the big pig. That was the second year. But look, every time I've been to Nundle, I've seen deer. I haven't shot one there yet, but I've seen them. The first trip I did there was with Pierre, who you'll probably remember. He was new to hunting. He'd been a shooter, but he had never hunted before. So it was more of a leading the blind, I guess, because I'd never done a state. That was my first state forest hunts. I'd shot fallow deer before. I've shot plenty fallow deer, but I've never shot them in Australia before. I've never hunted them in the state forest before. So, there was a bit of a blind leading the blind. It was an eye opener for both of us, but we saw deer. Pierre had a couple of opportunities on some, but he was inexperienced, and it was just really learning from those who'd been there a few times. So Adrian and yourself, who'd been there and kind of gave us a few pointers and recommendations. So it was really just absorbing from people and just learning. And from that, was actually you, Ian, who put us onto the mentored hunts at Ballindine. Went down for that one, managed to get Pierre his first deer with Ash Proud. Ash and myself have become pretty good mates, actually. We chat all the time and try and do a shoot whenever we can. So I've met through the ADA, I've met some really good people. I've met Mark, I've met yourself, Ash. So it's really about, the people and the social aspect, which is what I was missing from that UK shooting was, yes, I made some friends, but at the end of the day, you didn't all stand around the fire or sit around the fire with a cold beer or a rum or whatever is your tool of choice and talk about experiences and talk about hunting. And, it was what I was looking for. What I wanted was that huge open area to be able to hunt, to have the freedom as it is to explore that area, and to have that access, because in the UK it's all private land. There's no public land hunting. There's none of that. Even South Africa is all public land. Private land.
I was going to ask you that, whether it was all private
all
land over there. Must have been an
half-fence.
enormous change to come here and find public land access, and really be able to book and just go and explore and figure it out for yourself. That's a big change.
Absolutely. So when you think of public land, you think US, you think of the tag system that they've got, but that R license, it's really is a fantastic program. It gives you the opportunity to explore some really great areas of Australia. Like I'd never been to Nundle. I'd never even heard of Nundle before I heard about was told about the ADA trip down to Nundle State Forest, and through that I've been through some awesome little towns, places that I probably would never have explored. So to have access and the availability of those places to be able to go and hunt, it's amazing. Something that I wish we had here in Queensland. But the Nundle trip was great. The trip down to Valentine Station was awesome. Was a mental hunt. Got my first Australian fallow deer, although I'd shot them before. I've shot fallow deer even in South Africa. They're not native, but I've shot one there. I've shot a nice big buck. So I've shot fallow deer in 3 different countries, but to be able to shoot one here in Australia, which was awesome, was a great experience. But obviously that's on private land. But it was actually in the conversations that we had around that campfire in Nundle, where we spoke about the Pilliga and hunting goats in the Pilliga. Adrian was talking about, the ADA trips that they do out there in the middle of summer when it's stinking hot. They drive down and that really got me interested. I like a challenge. I like exploring new areas, and so spoke to Mark, and Mark gave me some pointers on where to go to the Pilliga and what to do, and what where to camp, and go to Swager's Bore and set up camp here and look in these areas and all that. So I think it was later that year. That probably would have been 4 years ago. We did my first trip out to the Pilliga, just a quick three or 4 night. I think it was a 3-night trip down to the Pilliga. It was October. It was sort of on that cusp of getting pretty warm. But it was, my first trip out to the Pilliga, and I just remember driving through when you get there to Moree and all those places. It's just flat as anything. And there's just it just seems so boring. You don't see how anything could be out there. And then you leave Narrabri and you start driving down that what is that, the Newell Highway, and all of a sudden you hit that tree line, and it just,
and you get that
soil.
feeling, and you're here.
And you hit that red soil, and you turn off the Newell Highway onto Pilliga Forest Way, and it's suddenly just this red soil with the forest on either side. And I remember taking a photo, and I put it up on Facebook, and Mike replied straight away saying, "I know exactly where you are." It's an incredible place, that the Pilliga. It's just this huge expanse, and you can sit in the middle of that forest, and you just think there's no one else anywhere near me. I'm in the middle of nowhere. I've got all this land that's available to me, and I can actually walk around with a firearm and feel free, I suppose. When you think of hunting in the US, and they get access to all these public lands, if you listen to the MeatEater podcasts and things like that, they're always talking about access and land access and public land. The fact that we actually have that available to us, it's something that we should not take for granted. It really is an asset, and we need to protect that and not do stupid things and get that taken away from us.
You did right. I spent a lot of my time as a hunter in Australia. In fact, the majority of my hunting life has been in Australia. So I moved over here as a late teenager. But I heard someone say it recently in a podcast, and I can't even remember which one it was, but they said it amazes them how many people in Australia want to plan their next overseas trip, their next trip to Alaska or to New Mexico or to New Zealand or somewhere else, and they've really even scratched the surface of what's available here. And it's probably only been probably over this COVID period that I've sat down and gone, all right, well, there's buffalo up north, and there's scrub bulls, and there's, bantang, and you can really chase a lot of the South Pacific. What do they call it? The South Pacific, however many are in the number, 12 or whatever it is. I'll get that wrong. But the volume of large game animals that you can chase here, there's so many in Australia. So I'm really now focusing on that. I've decided that, you know, you can spend a lot of money going to New Zealand. Well, you don't spend a heap of money going to New Zealand, but you can spend a lot more money than you would just going down to South Australia or, you know, chasing a Tassie fallow. You know, there's Roosa up north, things like that, and that's really something that I'll focus on. But the opportunities here are fantastic; they really are.
Absolutely, and I mean the big thing about that is, I suppose up north is, you know, in the territory is probably a bit different, but the number of species that you can hunt on public land. You know, Mark and I were planning a trip down to Victoria this year. Unfortunately, COVID, you know, meant that we couldn't do that. We looked at going out to New South Wales, and again, COVID stopped that. So as you say, the opportunities are here, and you know, it's even if you're targeting the same species, it's targeting a species in a different area, a different environment. You know, really challenging yourself. You go to Nundle and you're hunting some of those, you know, steep gullies looking for fallow, and then as you say, you go down to Tassie or you go to other areas of New South Wales where, you know, there's some good fallow hunting, but they're all different. It's all different environment. It's all different access. It's all different. It's a completely different hunt, but we have the availability of that land to choose from, you know, and you can choose to make the most of it, or you can choose to go overseas. And I mean, I've hunted in South Africa, I've hunted in the UK, I've been out to Canada. I didn't do a specific trip to Canada to hunt. I was out there visiting my mate Louis, who actually lives in Canada now, and he had an elk tag, and he said, well, let's go out for a day. He lives in Calgary, and we went up into the Rockies chasing elk. And you know, I didn't have a tag, I wasn't allowed to carry a rifle, but I had a pack on my back in case we shot something that I had to pack out. And it was minus 17 degrees, and up we went into the Rockies chasing elk. Unfortunately, we didn't get one. We saw, you know, some whitetail, we saw some mule deer, but you know, that was public land hunting in Canada. That was my experience. That was the first time I'd ever been on public land. And just to be able to have that freedom to say, well, I'm going to go to this place and just be able to walk onto that property or that block of land and be able to just to do that. You're not trespassing. You're not trespassing on someone's land. The coppers are going to come and arrest you. You're entitled to be on that land. It's a right for you to be on that land, and to have access to that. You know, you're driving around the Pilliga or Nundle, and you have, you know, you're allowed to be there. You're allowed to have a firearm to be driving around and have access. And you know, we need to be responsible. You know, we need to, you know, do the right thing. But to have that privilege, to have that access, is something we shouldn't take for granted. And you know, I remember we were in the Pilliga and on our recent trip just late last year, and we were driving around, and it was Darcy who said, he said, this is the closest thing you'll get to the hunting that people have in America. The fact that we can just be driving around looking for game, and be in the middle of nowhere with no one around us. And it's, you know, he says, I'll probably never get to hunt America, but I get to do this. And he loved it, absolutely loved it. So yeah, it's something we shouldn't take for granted. Something we need to fight to protect.
Look, mate, I couldn't agree more, and I think that gives us a good lead in to actually talk a little bit more in detail about the Pilliga and that last trip we put together down there. So that was so just for people listening, what was it? I can't even think. Was it last October? Was it
December? First week of December.
December. So I hunt Pilliga with the crew that I've hunted 10 years with down there, and one of them happened to not be able to make it, and I know Jono was keen to come along. So as soon as I said, oh look, we've got a space, he, you know, basically dropped everything and said sure. So we were going down, I think we went down for 5 or 6 days. So we usually hunt fairly lengthy period there. It's worth it, because the drive, and when you're there, you want to be in there and immersed in there. So we went down and we ended up camping at our usual spot, which is Swayze's Ball. We've actually found a new camping area a little bit closer to the road that we want to try next time. So we went down there for a 5 or 6 day goat hunt. So I'm going to throw it over to you, Jono, and tell us about that.
Yeah, well, look, I was very grateful to crack the nod for that invite. We've been, you know, talking a few times about trips and going away, and I'd done one previous trip to the Pilliga and used some of the knowledge that you'd gained over, you know, those 10 years of trips that you've done to be pretty successful. But yeah, to get, to crack the nod and get the invite, I was very grateful. But it was a good trip. It's an awesome drive when you're leaving Moree and on that section, and it's just flat and there's nothing there. And as I said earlier, you hit the forest and you hit that red dirt, and it's a long drive. It's the middle of nowhere. Swages Bore is, you drive down the track and it just keeps going and going.
You keep driving, don't you? Just keep going.
I think it's about 35k off the highway.
Yeah.
But when you look at it, you're camping in the middle of 300,000 acres. I think we had 300,000 acres available to us on that trip, with the some of the exclusions. It's just this huge expanse, and there's just no one else around. I don't think we saw, apart from we had a visit to camp one night, we didn't see anyone else really, apart from maybe the old Santos truck driving around. We didn't really see anyone else, and we had this whole area to ourselves. But it's an amazing area. It seems when you first drive in there that it's unassuming, that there's just nothing to it. But once you get closer to it, and I always find it takes you a couple of days to sort of get your eyes and ears used to the area. You need to adapt to it because everything's different. And every road you drive down is different. You think it's this flat area, but it's not. There's just these little creeks and gullies everywhere. That's these sandy little gullies that you can follow, and there's the trees change. You can have some pines, you can have some native forest blocks, native tree blocks. It's a very difficult place to explain. You've got this huge area available to you, and you're driving down the road, and it's just this sandy track. And all of a sudden you see a goat pop out or lying in the sand under a tree, and it's all systems go. And you try and get into these goats, and sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. But it's just something, when you're driving along there, you just never know what's going to happen. It's never the same. We were there when we first arrived on our trip, Mike. It was very wet. That had quite a few storms come through, and we saw very few animals. We saw a few tracks everywhere, but if you saw a goat, there was one or two. They weren't grouped together. There was no mobs. They were very, very much dispersed. They didn't have to travel anywhere because there was water on the ground everywhere. So they could. It's not like they were traveling to get water. So we were really struggling in those first few days. It was very wet. There was puddles everywhere. And then as the week progressed, it warmed up and it got drier, and all of a sudden the goats started mobbing up again, and we started seeing huge numbers. We were driving for an hour and you wouldn't see a single goat on day one, but by day 4 or 5 you'd be driving straight out of Swages Bore, and there'd be a mob of goats heading into the bore to come for a drink. So it's a place where it can just change, within a day, one day to the other, it can just change. I think no 2 days are ever the same there. And one K to the other is different. You can come out of the bore and head right, and it's very sandy, and there's nothing there. It's a few forestry plantations, and that's it. You head left, and it's quite rocky, and it's quite thick. And then you come down the track, and all of a sudden there's a drop down into a creek. And some of the creeks you can see contain a lot of water. You wouldn't think there's much water in that area, but that one creek that's down there can, all those little feeder creeks flow into it, and it just seems to gather all that water and head south. And we had trees that knocked over, and it was awesome to walk those bigger creeks, looking for goats or pigs. And sometimes you find them. I know Mark got stuck into them, but it was awesome just to follow the creek line, and where you'd find a bit of water, you'd generally find some sort of game, whether it was an emu or whether it was a kangaroo or a wallaby. There was always something, some sort of life form. That forest is just, it's so big, it's so vast, it just contains so much life. And whilst you might think that this area is, when you go down, for instance, you go down to the salt caves and you climb the fire tower, and you stand up there and you look out, and it just seems flat and unassuming, when it's not. It's so big and so vast that it just contains so much variety of wildlife, that it's an amazing place to be. We explored the far eastern side, which I'd never been down that way before, on the border with the agricultural side, and that was very different again. A lot of huge rocky outcrops, I remember, and I know Mark touched on this one. I can see him smirking already. We were driving up this hill, and Mark said, "Did I ever tell you that goats like rocks?" And over there's some rocks, and I was like, "Let's go and have a look." So we hopped out of the truck, and there's this huge sort of rocky outcrop, and we're walking around it, and all of a sudden the whole side of the outcrop just explodes with goats, and Mark starts shooting and takes one. I took a shot and almost blew Mark's eardrum out because he was standing next to me. But it was, you could hear goats across this whole rocky outcrop, and Mark was like, "You can hear them up there, run up that way." So I ran to the other side of the rocky outcrop, and there was another mob that was living on that side and had a they took off actually just almost up this full vertical face, and I took a shot at a nice belly, and he came tumbling down the rock face, and it kind of made me think of hunting Marco Polo sheep or something like that, seeing this big belly up on this vertical rock face come tumbling down. So a bit of excitement. It was awesome. That's something that'll probably stick with me for the rest of my life, that experience that we had on that rocky outcrop. But it kind of made you or made us change our hunting technique a little bit as well. Whereas before we were driving around just sort of looking for goats, we started seeking out those rocky outcrops and looking at the maps, trying to understand where you can see the track does a big sharp turn like this. Maybe that's a big rocky outcrop. Let's go and explore that one. So it changed our hunting tactics a little bit. Myself and Darcy went out and sort of sought out those rocky outcrops, and what Mark says is goats love rocks. They certainly do, because you could see the goat sign everywhere on some of those rocky outcrops. So it just shows you that you need to be versatile. You need to change your hunting tactics. Driving around just wasn't doing it. The goats weren't mobbed up, and they weren't having to walk around looking for water. They were not having to travel far to get that water, so you had to go looking for them, and we trained our tactics, and it worked. And as that week progressed, things dried up, and the goats started moving, and we started getting more goats. So it's a place where you can't have a single strategy. You've got to change that strategy according to the conditions. And I'm not a very experienced Pilliga hunter. I've only been there twice, and I think both trips are completely different. I think you can't go in with a single strategy. You've got to be prepared to understand what's going on in the conditions, and adapt. It shows you that one day to the next can be different. We got there and it was wet, and there weren't many goats. You had to go really looking for them. They're there. They're certainly there. It's just they weren't moving, so we weren't bumping into them. It's such a big block of land that if you're trying to drive around look for them, they could be anywhere. Whereas by the end of that week, conditions were drying up, and we started seeing them because they were moving. So you've got to adapt to the conditions. It was my first trip that I did there was October. It was on that sort of cusp of changing from spring to summer. So it was getting warm, but there was still the cooler nights. Whereas we went there in December, it was very, very hot, very, very dusty as the week got on. But you've just got to be adaptable. You've really got to read the conditions and adapt your hunting techniques accordingly. Think, what are the goats doing? Where are they? Why am I not seeing them around the water? We sat by some of those dams, and there was just nothing happening because they didn't need to come to the dams. Whereas on Mark's previous trip, there was no water around, so they had to come for a drink. So you've got to really read the conditions, read what's going on at that time. Is there much water on the ground? Is there not? If they're not, focus on the water holes. So, and we tried that at the beginning of the week, and it didn't work for us. So we had to change our tactics. We had to start walking around, driving around, cover some ground. It's such a huge piece of land that you've really got to be prepared to cover a lot of ground to try and find some sign. Look at the creek beds. Are the goats moving through those creek beds? If they are, maybe go for a walk. I remember my first trip that I did, it was very dry. There wasn't much water around. And one of Mark's tips was find a creek bed. If you see some sign, follow it. And I did that, walked up a creek bed for probably a K, and they're in the middle of dusting themselves and playing around was a mob of goats. So you've really got to adjust to the conditions.
So you saw goats around that rocky outcrop. That's a given. That's like fallow deer and the native, Mark. Goats and rocks. That's just what happens. You've got the obvious tactic of water, which is pretty well known for people that are chasing animals in Australia in dry conditions. You've wandered up a creek bed, and you were saying that the goats they're dusting themselves, so they're dust bathing rather than chasing water necessarily. Is this is a nice cool spot up the creek that they've found that they're just hanging out and playing? Is that what you found?
Yeah, absolutely. So in the heat of the day, they're looking for somewhere cool, and they're kicking up that sand under the trees in the creek beds where the sand's nice and soft to get the
cooler stuff. What other? So that's a different one I hadn't really thought too much about. And I'm the same. I've been to the Pilliga once. I led a group of people to the Pilliga, and I had never been there. That's just what we do as a branch. We just pick somewhere to go, and off we go, and we figured it out as we go. It was pretty successful as well. Probably went in a time where it was easy to spot the goats because they were mobbed up due to the water. But are there other interesting tactics like that? Following sign that makes a lot of sense. Finding them those cool areas makes a lot of sense. Where else would you find them? Is there anything else?
From my experience, so obviously you've got the water one, which you've mentioned, those creek beds, and then just really you've got to, from a feed perspective, there's nowhere in particular that I've noticed it, but really just those sandy creek beds for me was the main ones. If you can, I know on this trip we found water, which is obviously important for those animals, but from there what we did is we followed their sign, their tracks, following from there, because they tend to flow from water to water. They're not potentially coming into the same water all the time. They've got a track that they follow. So we were following those tracks through and getting good sign and following them. So just trying to find those different water courses that they're actually coming in to drink on.
They're fairly habitual then. Same route through the day.
Yeah, look, like any animal, they're gonna, they're very mindful of energy expenditure. So they're not going to walk away from water to find other water, but they do, because they're browsing animals as well. If you watch them in action, they slowly move as they browse. So with the particular trip that Jono and I went on, when we were going down, they actually were having some significant storms, and Darcy and Simon, good mates, were already there, and they actually held up in Narrabri as one of the big storms rolled through. And when we got there, it was obvious that a significant amount of water had gone through. For instance, all the creek beds were, bowling green smooth. And as Jono said, some of the big creeks that the little ones feed into, there was massive log jams and things like that. So the water would have been, phenomenal going through there. So the place was full of water, and I'd hunted there the year before, say right at the very apex of the drought, and there was no water everywhere, and so you only saw goats on dams. So because they were just basically staying close to the water supply. So we started off the week just exploring, and there was a day where it really turned, and that day was when we went over to the eastern side of Pilliga East. So crossed the Newell and went on to the eastern side, and we were right up against the boundary line along there. And as I said, the famous, did I ever tell you goats like rocks? That's where we saw it. And I don't mean rocks, this is like an escarpment. I said, and sure enough, literally pulled the truck up, got ready, said, just take it easy, walked around. There they are. They're just there on the escarpment. So we got into them. I say Jono got a bit rock crazy then. And was basically scanning the map for every rock there, like basically kicking over pebbles, see if there was a goat on it. But we kept going, and look, and that day Darcy and Simon got onto goats too. And in fact, when we met up, in the way that's how we hunt, we met up during the day. Simon had a goat, and he went, look at this, and I said, well, have a look at this one. So there's a bit of a competition there, and then we saw goats almost straight away that afternoon, and then we moved into another area where the last time there'd been very, very good sign of goats, but strange enough, there was none this time. So we were back over onto the Swages Bore part of the Pilliga, And when we were looking at those, sign and creek beds, so most of the creeks still had a bit of pool of water in very small spaces, but the sand was very smooth and still very wet. So there was moisture very close to the ground. And with sign, what we were doing was we were making a calculated guess at the quality, the volume, and the freshness of sign, because there was sign everywhere, because everything was smooth. So any tracks now were very clear for you. So what we were literally doing was driving along, and when you come to one of those tiny little washouts, look down and go, okay, there's been gates here. What is it? That's probably a day old. Keep moving until Simon, and I was hunting with Simon on the time. It was a very, very hot day. That's when the heat really had changed. It was starting to dry out, and we just saw, bucket loads of sign on this where the road crossed the creek. There is a lot of goats here. So we got ourselves ready, they're there, don't need to rush, just got ourselves ready and started walking. And the first part, actually, when I came around the corner, a large tree had fallen into the creek, and the amount of pig sign around that tree, I thought, they're right here. And I thought they're probably underneath that tree. I'm about to walk into them, they're going to bust out. But they'd moved off. But so the pigs had literally come down and created a nest under this fallen tree in the creek bed, because it's shady and the sand was still wet. So that was a perfect, wallowing situation with the pigs. We kept moving up that creek bed, and eventually, just kept following this huge amount of traffic tracks. And eventually we caught up to the animals making the tracks. And I think we rolled 8 that day. We were just amongst them. And so that was a really big, we'd gone from nothing to 2 days of goats. And then it continued on, and even on the last day as we were leaving, we saw more goats. So, and that was really that turn in the groundwater had dried up or had become less plentiful. So the goats were going back to, I suppose, what you might call a dry weather habit, moving around, looking for water, moving towards water. So, and Simon went down there later that year when some significant rain came through that area again, and actually experienced a little bit of flooding. So again, very, very difficult situations, because the animals just don't need to move. And they don't need to go to a dam, they just need to go to the side of a track in a drain where there's a puddle. So that tends to happen a lot.
Interesting. So if I ask you a different question then, Jono, your first experience, you said you've been twice, but your first experience, what did you get wrong? What did you expect to show up and see, and what were you not prepared for?
I think probably the first point is the vastness of the place, is the amount of ground that you've got to cover in a day. It's just such a big area, and it takes you such a long time to get from point A to point B. You look at the map and you see a Venza, and I think that Venza is a great mapping system, and you think, oh well, I'm going to go and hunt in this area. This looks good to me, but it takes you over an hour to get there. I think that's probably the first thing, is I underestimated the size of the place. You think, oh, I'm going to pop over to the salt caves. Well, it takes you, an hour and 20 minutes to get down to the salt caves. It's really the vastness of the place. I definitely underestimated that. The second point was probably the dust. The dust gets in everything, and you need to be prepared for it. For instance, I saw a goat, and I decided to go for a stalk, and was belly crawling, and I had a barno full of, I had to pick up my barnos and put them up to my face, and they were full of sand. So yeah, be prepared for dust to get into everything. That red dust just, and they're
fine, isn't it?
Oh yeah, it just gets into everything. But yeah, I like to go into an area, and I try to keep my expectations not low, but I like to keep them open. I like to really adapt to the area, but for me, it's the size of the place, and in some areas it can be very dense, and you can't go where you want to go. You've got to follow the tracks, or you got to follow the creeks. But you really need to be prepared for anything. You can come around a corner, as Mark said, in a creek, or you come around a corner in the street, in one of the tracks, and there's goats. You need to be ready. You need to be prepared. And I guess it's an awesome place to be, fantastic. But you need to have an open mind, and you need to change your tactics according to the conditions. That's probably the main thing to be, is really just to keep an open mind and read the conditions, and then adjust your tactics accordingly.
So then, moving from your first trip to your second trip, what did you then change? And I don't necessarily mean the way you hunted it, but did you have any gear changes? Did you go away and think about things that weren't optimal for those environments? I mean, you've brought your UK hunting kit with you, and you've rocked up to the Pilliga. I can only think about a few things that might have gone wrong with equipment, but or did it adapt? Tell me about that.
Well, look,
what you did there.
I was fortunate to have especially on that second trip, to have Mark as that mentor, and I think having someone who's familiar with the area, who's been before, is a huge advantage to actually, who's gained the experience of multiple trips to understand what's required. Like, I was talking about the vastness of the place and the distances you need to travel. Like, you look on a map and you think, oh, I'll just pop to town for some fuel. I don't need much food, or I don't need much water. It's a huge trek to get into Narrabri to stock up. So, and I know on that first trip, for instance, we didn't take much fuel in with us. We didn't take much food or water. We were significantly underprepared, and didn't really accept or understand the distances you had to travel. Where Mark was saying, no, getting into towns, it's a big operation. Let's take fuel, let's take water, let's take food. Make sure you're prepared for being in that forest, for being there for an extended period of time, and being able to be self-sustaining. That's probably the biggest takeaway for me. I'd hunted Nundle. I was, Nundle and Pilliga are completely different beasts. The Nundle's very, very wet, and very cold, whereas the Pilliga is very hot, and dry. I know in winter, Mark was saying they were freezing on the one trip they did there in the winter. So you need to be prepared for any condition. You can have a storm come through and you can get flooded. I know on the first trip that we did, we had a windstorm come through. And in the middle of the forest, you could hear it come rolling through, and it sounded like thunder, but it was actually wind coming rolling through the thunder, and tore our camp to pieces. So you really need to be prepared. But having that guidance and of an experienced visitor to the forest really helped. I took advice from Mark on what gear to take. He said it's going to be hot, it's going to be we've got the potential for storms. Make sure you got some winter gear, but make sure you've got sufficient food, sufficient water. If you don't, we'll make sure that amongst us we do. That's why you travel as a crew. You've got that, you've got the support of everyone. So it was really good having that sort of camp that we had. There was 4 of us. We had multiple vehicles. We had food. Everyone sort of shared the supplies that were available to make sure that no one was ever caught short. And I think, listening to the gear podcast that you guys put together, especially for the Pilliga, what to take, fuel, water, make sure you're prepared. Make sure you're prepared for the heat. You got adequate sun protection, and sufficient water. That's probably the biggest takeaway for me, was really just to be prepared, to understand what you could face, and be prepared for whatever the Pilliga throws at you.
Good answer.
Yeah, it's a good point. I think, if I remember, because just to explain, we go, for those listening, we go in as what we call a crew. So usually I hunt with 3 other people, and I've hunted there on a number of occasions with them. We usually take 3 vehicles. So there's always a vehicle in camp. And that the idea is that, there's actually a recovery vehicle if need be. But having that selection of vehicles, and having hunted together for a number of times, we've all got kind of roles. So, one guy will take, the kitchen and so on and so forth, which we share. But, we also share fuel. So we usually have around 100 litres of fuel in camp. and equal number of water. So we use and that's spread over, from drinking bottles to or what we call working water. So Darcy's got a little 40-litre working water tank reservoir on his car. So we just have that, and what that makes is, in all honesty, it means longer time hunting, less time doing stuff that gets in the way of hunting. So when we go, for instance, over to the far side on the day we went over, we left not long after dawn and we got back, on dusk. It was a big, long day, but, we were completely comfortable. We took 2 vehicles. We said, this is where we're going to meet up. This is if you don't meet up, this is what we'll do. We had plenty of fuel in the cars. We had plenty of water in the cars and food. So all that kind of can sound a little, if you're used to hunting something like private land where, you're staying in a shearing shed or something like that, it can sound a little bit too much. But what all that means is you're spending more time looking for game because you're not worrying about, oh, okay, hang on, I'm a bit low on fuel. What are we going to do? Having that fuel reserve in camp means that each morning you grab a jerry can and we move it around and top up the vehicle. So you always run with a full tank in your vehicle. Same with the water. And at night at camp, having a good set of mates around you that work well together means that someone will say, okay, I'm cooking tonight, and it just makes for a very, very enjoyable trip away. And I always regard it as, average Joe safaris. That's what it is. That's what we do. We're average Joe safaris. And the idea is hunt hard during the day, get back, enjoy yourself at camp, and repeat until you run out of time and you have to go home.
Yeah, and I guess, what you're saying about that, having that camp and how everyone shares resources. When I went, my first trip to the Pilliga was in October. Every night we had the fire going. We go and grab a fallen log and get the fire going, cook some food on the fire. We get back there, on our trip in December, and the forestry has said no fires whatsoever. And I'd gone prepared, with my food that I had taken I was going to cook on the fire. And you look at, there's no fire ban, so that's fine. I can, we'll have a fire, we'll sit around the fire, cook some food. I took a grill, and everything will be fine. You get there and there's a big sign saying absolutely no fires. And if it wasn't for the communal aspect of camp, where someone will crank on the gas burner because I didn't take one because I thought I'd be cooking on fire, to actually cook some dinner, meant that I didn't go hungry. So it really pays to have a good crew, and a crew who are prepared to share, that there's no selfishness going on, that no one's going, this is mine, I'm not sharing with you, you can go hungry. And that it was really good to have that crew. They all worked well together, they were all prepared, and willing to share. That's the thing, is you can't be selfish out there. You're on your own in the middle of 300,000 acres, and you need to look after each other, because if someone didn't have water or didn't have food out there, it's a long way to town to try and stock up on something. So and I guess that leads into the other thing, is that you need to be prepared for whatever the forest throws at you. You can go in there thinking, I'll have a fire, and the Forestry Commission shuts that down. So be prepared. I think make sure that you're going in there with, what are my contingencies? If I can't have a fire, can I cook on a gas grill, or can I open a can of beans and whatever? Just be prepared.
That's another good point, because for on that particular trip, it wasn't a fire ban. It was just, there was a no fire at all for so many months. That was it. It was just a rule. And we got there and there's literally, tacked to a tree, no fires. So, okay, sure. And,
it's interesting. I'd run into those signs. I think I mentioned this in another discussion. I ran into the same sign going into the Severn State Forest, and I rang the phone number on it and said, I'm here for a week. I'm at this location. It looks fairly green. Is there any leniency? And they said, oh, yeah, that'll be okay. Just make sure you build a decent fire ring. And now that we know that you're there, that's okay. They took my details. So if you have any problems, give us a yell. and that was in the middle of that 3-month fire ban period. They were, the local ranger on call was able to give you permission to do it. So it's worth making a phone call if nothing else.
Yeah, though you're not going to make a phone call from Swages Bore unless, of course, you've got the system to do it.
Hey, the old Self-I Go goes pretty well.
That's it.
I tell you though, you can send a good message. We're talking about drones before. On one of the trips in New Zealand that we were on, we couldn't get service where we were. But you know, when you get your iPhone or various different phone that you might have, you send a message and you watch the bar go across. And when the bar doesn't quite get there and you know it's going to shit itself, that's the end of your message. Well, that means that you've got about 25 seconds to strap that sucker to a drone and fly as high as you can, and that message will go. There is always a way. Technology.
Well, you can have a drone handy, I suppose. Yeah,
can help us. Yeah, that's right. But it's there's some of the fun things.
So if we've covered it pretty strongly, but if someone was to say to you, Jono, look, I want to go hunt the Pilliga, what would be your advice?
Be prepared. Don't go in there thinking that it's a quick trip into town. Make sure you're self-sufficient, that you've got a camp that's got sufficient fuel, sufficient water, sufficient food, that you're prepared, not just from a camp perspective, but from when you're heading out to look for game. Be prepared for game to be around the next corner, to be in the middle of the road, to be anywhere. You've got to be prepared. You've got to read the conditions. If it's wet and the game's not going to be moving, you've got to change your tactics. Be prepared to cover big distances. If you want to hunt the eastern side, be prepared to spend a day down there. It's not a quick little hop across the highway. It's a full day, and be prepared for it. Take food, take sufficient water, and just enjoy it. It's a fantastic place. It's nothing like you've ever experienced before, and just really take it all in and appreciate that you've got this huge amount of land available to you, that you can go out there and enjoy it and hunt it, and you're probably not going to bump into anyone else. So yeah, just enjoy it.
That's good. I'm looking forward to going back, fellas. I tell you, since we started talking about it, and Mark hasn't stopped talking about it. I'm really keen for these borders to let us go again. It'll be an interesting trip to pull together a few of the guys that have been talking about it and get out there with a little bit of experience behind us, maybe, if we can con one of you fellas to come with us. And yeah, we'll see how we go. Yeah, well,
I think I usually am there once, about 18-month cycle, it seems. So it's getting edgy. I've hunted there most times of the year, one time or another. So I've hunted there at dead of winter, and it was cold. It warmed up during the day, but it was cold at night, and in the morning it was frigid. And water bottles froze and stuff like that. So it's proper cold. I've hunted there in January when it's like 40 degrees plus every day. And that's hard yakka, especially if you're dragging animals out of the scrub. I remember the best bill I ever shot. I shot at that time of year and dragging. I kind of was the enthusiasm of the success. I grabbed him and dragged him out, and then I was cooked for the rest of the day. I was done. That was an interesting one. And and through those October and through the later on in the summer and into autumn, and you see the whole place change. You see, interestingly enough, you see things like different birds at different times of year. I know that Pilliga has a worldwide reputation for its bird life. You see different birds come into play, so you'll see, you'll get different bird calls, and you'll see different things, and each time you'll see a bird and I go, I haven't seen that bird before, and there it is. When you get various the cycle of the various flora there as well, so the flowers and the wildflowers come up, and of course then you get the difference with the way the animals react to the heat as opposed to the colder weather. As I said, we were there in really, I think it was 2018 when we were there in the really bad drought. And it was also the middle of winter, and that's where the guys found an emu that had gone into one of the dams that was now just really just a puddle, gone in, got stuck in the mud trying to get to the water, and then froze. And they saw this thing laying on the ground, and it was this emu kind of encased in a bit of muddy ice that either, died of hypothermia or died of exhaustion, but basically got stuck in the mud trying to get to the water supply. And what we found that particular year, again, we were having a hard time locating those goats, was that between a couple of the major arterials that run through the Pilliga, there's a number of dams, and they were literally inside the ring of those dams, moving as a mob over each day from one dam to another. So we figured out what was happening, and so we happened to be on the very last day. We happened to be on the right dam when they came into water, and I shot a very good black billy. But that year was the year I shot the most pigs in there ever. But all of those pigs were at the time looked like they'd been eating carrion. Their hair was dried out and really bristly. They had this weird effect where they all looked like they had white stripes on their snouts. But what we realised after shooting the first one was that actually they were bare from continually digging in the dirt, trying to find food and water. They'd actually worn all the hair off the snout. So all of them had this kind of weird, what looked like a white snout, but it was actually a bald snout where they'd rub the hair off. The other good, if you think about going there, another one of the good camping spots is further on down the Pilliga Way. I think they call it the Mills Crossing. It's where there's a windmill, and obviously it was a stockyard at once upon a time, and it's on a creek, and it's another very nice place to camp. Again, no water or anything there, like there is no facilities there at all, but a good open space. It's still got those weird, one of those weird picnic tables that someone once upon a time decided to populate all over Pilliga. Let's put a picnic table here 40 k's off the road. Someone will come use it. So there's one of those there. So you've got a table to eat at, and so that's a really interesting place. But as I said, we found another camp spot over closer to the road, not on closer road, but closer to the road. And I think on that last trip that we had, Jono, was when that bottom, I think they call it the stockyard dam, was full of water, and that's I've seen that. I think it took me 6 years to actually see water in that. So I always just thought it was dry, but then the one year I went down there and had a bit of water there, and this time it was spectacular. It was like a North Queensland lagoon. You'd expected it just to be full of animals. So that's also another interesting thing to see. So with yourself, now that you've conquered the Pilliga and Nundle, what's next? Where to next?
I think the Pilliga is always going to be on that list. I know there's a number of other places to visit, but I think the Pilliga, it holds a special place in my heart. I'll certainly keep going back. I'd like to explore some of the more southern state forests, up towards more Sydney side, or even further south than that towards the Victorian border, more those alpine regions. I think that's probably an area I'd like to explore once the borders open, of course. I'd like to get down to Nundle. I haven't been down there in a few years. I know it's changed a bit since the fires have been through, but I'd love to do another Nundle trip.
It's a different place.
Yeah.
And not because of the fires. It's a different place every time I go. It's a different place because it's been logged. Some of the places that I would frequent every single year that I go there, I drive straight past them. I don't even recognise them because the trees are gone, and they've put logging truck, hardened roads that were just boggy tracks before. You can't even recognise it. It's amazing, which is what makes it such a great place. You can't go back there and go, I'm going to go hunt my normal spot because it's gone. It doesn't exist. So yeah, I love going down there. It's an easy one for me because I can hop in the car and easily be there in half a day and be set up and ready to go hunting. It's a an extended weekend you can do there. You guys have got a couple more hours coming out of Brisbane, but it's a good one. But I agree, going down to some of those southern forests now, for me, we've done a few years in a row now down for Samba. We take the branch down there. We weren't successful this year, unfortunately. We did manage to go, I can't even remember where it was. It wasn't September. It must have been I can't even remember. It was that long ago now with so much going on. But it was, it was in the last 12 months that we took the branch down there. But there'd been a lot of culling going on in there in the valley that we went to. It unfortunately had a lot of attention from spotlight colours that have been employed to be in there in 1080. So it was slim pickings. But I love going down there. It's a great place, and being able to get public land access in New South Wales that's got Samba on it, as well as potentially Reds or Fallow would be a dream. And there are a couple of blocks down there that do that. So we might tag team on that one, Jono. What do you reckon?
I'm definitely keen, mate. But I must say the other thing from listening to your podcast is Severn. So I've not been to Severn yet.
Yeah, haven't been.
I haven't been, and yeah, your podcast is. I actually dropped Mark a text after that, after the podcast came out, saying you guys have got me so keen on hopping down to Severn for a few days. So I know it's not a big block, but yeah, listening to the podcast about it, it's really got me intrigued, and I've already been looking around on Google Earth and all that, trying to find those rocky outcrops you're talking about. So I've been doing my e-scouting, trying to get all ready for that trip. Yeah. When that border opens, I reckon I need to get my my public land fix, and I think that's the easiest one to tickle.
Good luck getting it. I reckon I've got it booked, and every time my booking runs out, I rebook and I rebook and I rebook and I rebook, and we've been rebooking, just waiting for these bloody borders. But once that's sorted out, yeah, it'd be good to show you around actually.
Oh, yeah, look, I'll be keen for that.
You can never underestimate the value of Severn. It looks small compared to the other forests, but it's not small. I mean, if it was a private block, you'd be, think, wow, this is fantastic. It's not small, but it just happens to have very, very big cousins. Pilliga being one of them. And I remember when you are hunting the Pilliga, that's only one of the forests. There's Pilliga West, which is about an hour away to the west, and I think that's a 20 by 20 kilometre square block as well. So that's hard, and you can book both at the same time. So you can end up, with literally hundreds of thousands of hectares of land to play around in. This time we actually booked
Jack's Creek.
And as these weird things happen, I was speaking to someone last week who owns a little bit of land down there, Jack's Creek, just near the fish farm. So.
Oh really? That's
it was just I was talking to someone, and they were talking about this secret hideaway they got at Jack's Creek, and I said, I know where that is. It's near the fish farm. And he went, yeah, and kind of took all the wind out of his house because I knew exactly where he's talking about.
There's no secret spots.
How do you know that place? I said, yeah, strange enough. That was just outside of Quilpit, in fact. So there's a number of those southern blocks that I think need to be well investigated. When on our most recent family road trip to New South Wales, which was in April, we checked out. There was a couple I checked out on the state forest. So I checked out on the way, and I thought these are worth looking at. They certainly are worth looking at. So
I will say that Jack's Creek was an interesting state forest because obviously it's close to the highway, it's closer to town, and there's a few private blocks up that way as well. And we hopped out to go and explore a dam to see if there was any pigs on it. I don't know if you recall this, Mike, when we found someone's leftover clothes from some sort of party all strewn across the one of those picnic benches actually that you mentioned. There was some clothes and some bras, and who knows what went on out there. It must have been one hell of a party, but it just shows you that there's some strange thing that goes out that way.
Probably just hiding in the bush outside a site. You'd scared them into the bush.
Look,
ruined their party.
That's not out of the realm of possibility. Yeah, there's a particular little picnic ground in Jack's Creek. And it's got a fairly significant timber structure made there, and we came in and went, oh, okay. I don't know if Jack's here, but we found someone else's camp, and so we looked around, and backed out and said, "We'll leave them to their own devices." But that is true. Up that far end, you kind of there's a number of blocks where you've got to be very, very careful understanding where you are, because you're right on the border of private land, and it's not a straight line by any means. Whereas once you get down into the more southern ends, you get right into the state forest part of it. And I think a lot of people who have tried the Pilliga haven't explored that most eastern side of the block too, so east of the Newell Highway, but it produces.
Absolutely. I mean, we drove that eastern boundary line, which is literally right up against the agricultural side of it. So there's private agricultural lands, and we were driving, a track that is literally the other side of the fence of that. And I think that side probably sees a bit more, I wouldn't say poaching, but probably a lot more impact. I think those farmers must get a lot of animals coming in, looking at the state of the fences. There's some big holes in them, and we saw emus and the rest of it, but I'm sure the pigs and the goats, and that must be hitting those crops. So I think it must get hit a bit harder, but there were certainly some good game numbers, and that's where the side of the deer are coming in from. We've heard, and I know you guys spoke about it, that there's been, there's deer in the Pilliga. It's on that eastern side. They're coming up, from the Tamworth area all the way up that valley, which is heading up that eastern side of the Pilliga. So I think, maybe with COVID and the deer haven't been hit so hard in New South Wales, maybe they're going to, keep exploring up that way. It'd be good to get some deer in the Pilliga. And I think if you are, it's going to be that eastern side of it. It's really thick and heavy going. I think, you'll struggle to find them, but they must be in there. I know there's some good feed for them on that fringe country. So they might be hiding in the forest and heading out onto the agricultural properties to eat. So it would be good. It would make it a really good addition to a hunting trip down to the Pilliga if you could grab a red or a fallow or something like that.
Be great.
Look, I think that's where. I mean, I actually think there is some. On the harvest returns, there might be actually some harvest returns of deer in the Jacks Creek side, but that's obviously where they're going to come up. They're going to come up through that far eastern side and into the forest. And in fact, the best goat I've taken was in that side of the forest, and the second best, that for a number of years that was the best, I took over in Pilliga West. So I've never taken a big animal in the main area of Pilliga East. I mean, I've taken a lot of animals in there. I've taken pigs out of there, but the big goats I've found on both sides rather than that middle. But I mean, that doesn't mean that necessarily that's their stomping ground, but that's where I've done my best on the bigger goats in those two areas.
And really, that eastern side, it's a very different landscape. That's where we found that first rocky outcrop where we saw those ghosts on. But as Mark said earlier, I got out the map and was seeking out those areas and found a few other areas where, big rocky outcrops with some caves, and you can see the goat sign on them. But that's predominantly on that far eastern side where those big rocky outcrops are, and it's certainly worth exploring. It's a very different landscape. It's just these big mountain. I'd say mountains, but these big rocky outcrops with some nice big gorges and that. And it's, when you read Eric Rolls's, Million Wild Acres, he talks about the caves and people living in the caves and all that. And it's got to be down that area. And it's, that borders on an Aboriginal area. So, to explore those caves, and, we went walking up there and into the caves and potentially someone lived in there, hundreds of thousands of years ago. It's really a fantastic place. It's not just a forest. It's probably got some significant, history to it as well. It's an amazing place, absolutely amazing place.
Yeah, when he talks about in that book, he talks about the cave paintings. I'm assuming it's somewhere in that region, because the further you go west, the less you see of that. And when you actually go to Pilliga West itself, it's actually a very flat block, and it's pretty prone to some serious flood damage. So when they get a decent bit of rain, it often they'll have to enclose it because the roads will just get washed out. So yeah, as you head east, you start to kind of lift out, and you do get a lot more rock escarpments and stuff. So I would assume, I never really try to find out where he's talking about those caves, because he was talking about the fact that the goats had been in there and rubbed off by rubbing against the rock walls of the caves, that actually removed the rock art from the walls. The goats literally rubbed it off, and I'm pretty sure he's talking about it on that side somewhere. And he's also talks about Bohemia Creek, which is on that side as well.
Yeah, because I went into some of those caves, and the goat sign, the goat smell is unbelievable.
Intense, yeah.
Oh, it's just that ammonia smell from them in these caves. But yeah, look, if there was some rock art in there, it would be an amazing find. But I would hope that they get protected. When we were there was a lot of graffiti in those caves. People scratching in their names and that, which is really sad to see. These are such old structures. They've been there for millions of years, and potentially, the Aboriginal history of some of those caves, and to see people scratching in, someone's name, I was here, or with a heart and all the rest of it, was just quite sad to see that something so potentially, something so amazing could be damaged like that and vandalized. So we need to protect this. We don't want to be doing the wrong thing. We don't want to be causing any damage. To be out in those areas, to have access is a privilege, and we mustn't do the wrong thing. We need to protect them. Otherwise, if we get these taken away from us, that'll be a very sad day for all of us.
I think that's a good note to end it on, fellas. That's a good summary. We've spoken a lot about the Pilliga now. It gives me a lot more confidence, that's for sure, going in there and finding different places. I was hoping there'd be a little bit of a clue as to where this magical goat rock might be, and I might edit that out for everybody else, but I'll maintain that in my little black book.
For the magical goat rock, it's big, okay? It's not like it's going to go. When we say rock, that's maybe a little misleading. It's like an escarpment.
Yeah, and it keeps going. You think
it's right. I was on top of it, chasing them on top of it for a while. So yeah, there's a fair bit of rock there, and in fact, it just, you just realize, you start, I think you see it actually before you get to it. It kind of appears out of the trees, and that's when I said, "Did I ever tell you how much goats like rocks?" And that was it. That's it. It's one of those great coming together of events.
Yeah, no, very true. Well, good luck with your pursuits, Jono. Thanks for sharing your insights. Interesting to hear the journey from South Africa up to up or over or around to the UK, and then down under to Australia, and you've really taken it on. So good on you, and hopefully we can join you on a trip sometime shortly when we're allowed to venture south, because we're all getting itchy feet. I can feel it.
Absolutely. As we said earlier, Mark and I had a few trips planned, and we slowly pulled them back closer to the border. First it was Victoria, then it was New South Wales, and now we're still stuck in Queensland. So hopefully,
my latest one's just been cancelled. I had my email from Air New Zealand last week saying we've cancelled your flight in November, so that's off. I've now got a blank card, and I'm off fishing.
That's a dream of mine, is to hunt New Zealand. I'd love to. That's public land hunting at its best, I think. Just those.
It's good conversation for another podcast coming up. I can tell you, it's a different experience, that's for sure.
That's it. Okay, mate. Well, look, thank you very much for your time and your knowledge and experience. I'm sure those listening are going to get, as we hope, a little bit more confidence in taking this on for themselves. So again, thank you for that.
Yeah, no problem. Anytime.
All right. We'll catch you around sometime soon.
Definitely catch you up soon.
All right.
Okay,
Cheers, guys.
See you again.
See you guys. Bye.